This episode of Escaping Rock Bottom is sponsored by Sabino Recovery. As an ambassador of Sabino Recovery, I have seen firsthand how they transform lives in a compassionate and loving environment. Sabino Recovery is a residential treatment program that addresses trauma, substance use, mental health, and maladaptive coping mechanisms. They offer one-on-one counseling, EMDR therapy, equine therapy, yoga, and so much more. If you would like to learn more about Sabino Recovery, please visit sabinorecovery.com or contact the number provided in the description of this podcast. Hey everyone, it's Brandon Lee, host of the podcast Escaping Rock Bottom. I have a really great guest who has a pretty incredible story he's going to share with us today. It's about his experience, his strength, and his hope. That's what this podcast is all about. There's a lot of people out there right now with the political climate we're all living through, as well as the pandemic. There's a lot of people who are struggling out there, and I just want to get stories of hope out there so that you at home who are listening or watching this podcast don't feel hopeless. Roy is a board advisor here at Sabino Recovery. Roy, thank you for being willing to share your story today.
Well, I'm glad to be with you, Brandon. Thanks for
I asked this about everybody, Roy. Take me back to your childhood. Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Newark, New Jersey, but I really grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania from age 6 to 16. And I probably had one of those most idyllic childhoods. Mom, dad, 2 younger brothers, where every kid in the neighborhood played in the front yard, did all the neat things that you do when you grow up, play t-ball, all the different fun things at school. Just terrific family environment and closeness with grandparents. Both my grandmothers, very close to them. Even though they lived in other states, they would come up and babysit when my parents would go out of town. So it was a very nurturing environment from both my parents.
Did you ever struggle with alcohol or drugs as a child or a teenager in college or even as an adult?
No, not at all. Never really had an issue with that. I have always been a social drinker, so it was never really something that, hit home with me at all.
You know, we talk about what I think, Roy, what makes Sabino so great, and I'm curious as to what drew your
Right.
life path to Sabino, in that I've always believed that trauma is the gateway to alcoholism, that trauma is the gateway to drug addiction. And until we learn to identify and heal people's trauma, people will continue to suffer. People, even in recovery, if they never address that traumatic event that happened in their life, they could easily relapse, right?
Right.
Have you ever suffered trauma in your life?
Well, actually, the reason that I'm a part of the Sabino as a board advisor is a trauma that I suffered 9 years ago by losing my daughter at 18 years old. She was diagnosed bipolar about 6 weeks before she passed. Didn't really want to believe in the diagnosis. Struggled with that. Suffered from, anxiety and some depression. We saw early signs at 12 years old. Went to a specialist at Cleveland Clinic at 18 and realized that she was bipolar. But she didn't want to believe it and didn't want to take any medication. So 6 weeks after that diagnosis, April 5th of 2012, she took her own life. So that trauma that my wife and I and my son, we experienced was obviously, devastating for the family.
I'm sorry that you had to go through that and have had to have that experience in your life. I'm not a parent, so it's hard for me to understand what a loss like that can be like. When you look back, my mother's bipolar, and she refuses to acknowledge it, has refused to take medications for it. And unfortunately, I've had to end that relationship because of the toxicity that it was bringing to my life. It's reversed roles, though.
Yeah. So
it's different. Were there signs that your daughter was struggling?
Yeah, it's funny you brought that up. So my wife noticed it first. I think she was like 11 or 12, and we were on a vacation. And she got up one morning before everybody else did, and just, if I remember correctly, just wore her pajamas and went to the local mall when it opened to go shopping in just pajamas, bare feet, and just wanted to go look for something at the mall. And came back, almost nobody really noticed because we, sleeping late at typical vacation. And right away at that point, she recognized, and then I recognized that there's something more going on than, just a preteen or teen dealing with normal life. And from then on, we were of means, so we brought her to the experts, and they came up with some diagnosis of defiance disorder. And
did they just think she was a troubled teen?
I think so.
Defiance disorder.
Yes. I think that's probably what they did. And they did a 2-day intensive assessment of her. We believe now, obviously misdiagnosed. But they also didn't want to categorize somebody bipolar. I'm not clinical, but bipolar prior to 18, prior to being an adult. So, she struggled off and on with things from that age until 18 with anxiety and depression.
Did she ever, in her own mental health struggles, did she ever choose drugs or alcohol? Did you ever find that in her behavior?
Yes. So you're right on. She, not that we were aware of on drugs, because we were pretty close parents with her as best we could. But we could tell that there were times, later teen years, 16, 17, 18, where she would, break curfew, stay out late, drink too much.
So a little bit of that, like rebellion.
Now we thought part of it was rebellion, but some of it went too far at times, like committing to be home at a certain time, and then we finding out that she's till 2 to 4 a.m. and then go try to find her.
Right.
Situation. So it was a little more than,
disrespecting mom and dad.
Correct.
Right. This is really going to help a lot of parents, because I have a ton of parents who listen to this podcast. They listen for hope, right? They listen for answers, right? Because a lot of parents, which I'm sure they're going to be able to identify with your story, is they just don't get it, right? They're like, no, I've raised you. Like, why are you going sideways? Why are you acting this way? And parents get so frustrated because they sometimes don't have the resources to get their child in front of a psychologist or psychiatrist, to get them, that kind of mental health evaluation that they need. And I think sometimes people don't understand the struggle from a parental side of view, from a parent's perspective. Because once your daughter was diagnosed as bipolar, you said that she struggled to accept that diagnosis.
Correct.
But to me, and again, I'm not a doctor, I've just been around this a long time. To me, that is also part of the stigma that exists. That when somebody is diagnosed with a mental disorder, they probably don't want to accept it because of the shame that society puts on people with mental health disorders.
I totally agree. Matter of fact, I think there's a couple other factors that were involved with her that probably relate to others. One is she had an older brother that, could do no wrong. So to her, she felt, well, if I have this issue and my older brother doesn't have anything that seems outwardly or inwardly, anything, potentially wrong with him, for lack of better terms, shame on me, right? And then two parents that fully didn't understand at the time how to walk through that part of life to really help her understand what she's dealing with from then on. And once she's diagnosed, we did try to explain that it's almost like, if you got an infection, you would take an antibiotic. So if you have bipolar, you would take medication for that. And that, at that time, it kind of went in one ear out the other.
Yeah. So. But even as a parent, were you able to force her to take that medication?
Well, no, we weren't. The day that she passed, actually, if I remember correctly, I was out of town, and my wife was, because usually they don't allow, the medication. My wife was going to the doctor's office to go get the medication, to bring it home to her, and when she got home is when she found her.
So she had never even begun to take
she hadn't
any
even
medication.
Started. She was going to start that day.
For the bipolar disorder.
Correct.
Do you think the reason why she took her life that day is because she knew she was going to be taking that medicine?
No, there was actually, which I failed to mention, is there was kind of a bullying incident with a boy and another girl 2 days or 2 nights prior. That kind of accelerated the depressive, from manic down to the low. And that kind of, because I remember I was talking to her on the Monday night from out of town, and she was just terrific, doing great. She wanted to go to Mavericks basketball game. She asked me if she could get tickets for her best friend. Her and her best friend could go. I got her tickets. She called me from the game and said, "Dad, thank you for getting the tickets." She was just, doing terrific. And that was Monday night. Thursday night is when she passed. And then she even called me later and said on the way home, just thanks again, Dad. Sorry you weren't here, and we're out of town and couldn't come. And obviously, look backing on that, it kind of hit pretty hard, because I found out at the funeral, because my father-in-law did the eulogy, that she had bought a Number One Dad t-shirt to wear. And I didn't know that until the eulogy that was done. So obviously, that night she had bought that shirt. So it was, pretty touching.
And hard.
Oh, yeah.
How many years ago was this?
It'll be 9 years this April.
Still hard.
Oh, yeah. I think about her every day. Every day.
I don't ever want anybody to ever live with regret or shame or guilt, but those are real feelings.
Yeah.
Those are real feelings. Have you felt some of those in the time since she's passed?
For sure. I mean,
what could I have done? Did I do enough?
Yeah, I even talked to my wife about coming home early, because I sensed in the day after that, there was something that changed. But my wife actually, sadly, was dealing with the pneumonia. She was in bed, not feeling well. She, "Oh no, I think she's, okay, and everything's fine." So I have went through a ton of guilt of not coming home right away. And, like I've talked with folks in getting help for myself, would that have made the difference or not? Nobody knows. You can't answer that question. And I've learned that going through some therapy.
I think that is so important of your message, Roy, in that I have seen in this line of work, parents lose a child to addiction, to an overdose, to suicide. That death, a horrific, tragic event, traumatic event in someone's life. And I have seen that death ruin marriages, cause divorce, rip families apart, because the parents sometimes don't go to therapy, don't do the work, the traumatic work. Guess what mom and dad end up doing? Turning to pain pills, turning to
Yeah.
alcohol,
Yeah.
turning to a substance to numb themselves of this traumatic event of the loss of a child, the guilt, the shame.
Yeah.
It piles up, the weight of the world on your shoulders. How do I relieve myself of this weight? Well, if you don't do trauma therapy, you will absolutely turn to a bottle. It'll destroy every relationship around you. How has that trauma therapy helped you heal from the loss of your daughter?
Well, I would say three things. One is definitely anybody who has experienced, like you described very well, a loss of a child, please get help. Don't stuff it, because that's the typical thing that especially a male does. Don't stuff it. Because I stuffed it for years and then finally went to get some intensive trauma help.
When you did that, let me ask, when you did compartmentalize, right? Traumatic event happens. I don't like the way that feels. I'm going to compartmentalize, forget it.
Right.
We don't forget it. It really lives
Right.
down here in the lower part of the brain. And we don't even realize it. We start to make really poor life choices because that energy is still there. That traumatic event that has never been worked through right there, right? Our wiring has been thrown off and we're firing like this. In the years that you put it in the back part of your brain to try to forget about it and not let it impact you, almost go numb to it. Did that change your behavior?
Well, it actually accelerated my involvement in my work, and doing what we do today. My wife and I and my son do today is helping others through. We have our own psychiatry practice, which we're building out for adolescents, and interventional psychiatry for adults. And obviously this role as board advisor to Sabino to help Sabino build out its program strategically, culturally, leadership-wise. All I did was just pour everything into how to do that. And similar to my wife, she also went to get help and get treatment. But in Dallas, we actually have a store named after my daughter, Britt Rose. It's called Britt Rose. And the neat part about it is we donate to 3 not-for-profit avenues that support suicide prevention. And so we don't keep any of the money. All the money is donated. And it's just a neat place that we can reach out and touch and talk about what happened to us and how we can help others. And every week, almost every week, either my wife, my son, or I get contacted by a family that is dealing with an adolescent or young adult that is dealing with major depressive disorder, bipolar, suicide ideations, suicide attempts. Actually, just before I came out from Dallas today, last night, we had another reach out to a young 23-year-old young girl that's a young lady that's interested in getting help. And we're helping her. And actually, she's going to be going out to treatment within a week. So, I mean,
That's amazing.
just as we're starting this podcast,
Yeah.
before I got here, I just found out that she's coming out to treatment. And this happens all the time. So that memory of Brittany, of what we're doing to help others, is just like, I get chills.
I was like, I'm getting teary eyed listening to that because, Shara, clinical director down here at Sabino Recovery, Shara and I were talking recently on a podcast about finding our purpose. And when we find our purpose, we can live, right? And when you were telling that story, I started to get teary-eyed because on December 23rd, before I took off for a little bit of a break from work, I came offset on studio and I went back to my office and there was an envelope there and it was a Christmas card. And I opened it up and a reporter from Tulsa, Oklahoma, I don't know who he is, he wrote on the card, he says, "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are. And I discovered your book and I discovered your podcast. Brandon, I want to let you know that I was molested and raped by my dad growing up as a child. And I never got help for it. I've made 2 suicide attempts this past year. And he goes, I discovered your book a week ago. And I was planning to take my life on Christmas Day here in Tulsa. I had the bridge picked out.
Oh, my God.
And I finished your book. And I listened to multiple episodes of your podcast. Your story's saving my life. I'm not going to take my life. And I've decided to get help. And, I can cry about it now because I tell people all the time, Roy, I said, I did not suffer all that trauma in my life just so I could be okay. That's not finding my purpose in life. My purpose in life was I signed up, I think, before I entered this life for a difficult life.
Yeah.
But in order to help people, and that getting that letter, right, fuels me and is a reminder to me, yeah, Brandon, you went through a lot, but your purpose is to help people. And as crappy and as shitty as some of that stuff that you and I, Roy, have been through, to be able to know that we can still help people survive so that no other parent has to suffer what you have suffered through is what fuels my purpose and keeps me sober and keeps me on track.
Yeah. Well, I totally agree with you. I think what we're doing by you setting, your book, how you practice your life. I mean, I'm just, what a blessing that was before you started the holidays.
Yeah. Because as a parent, and I want to speak about this because we just passed the holidays here recently, and that's a really trying time for parents who've lost a child through suicide.
Yeah. It is.
It's also a time, Roy, when suicides happen. Mm-hmm. Studies just came out from the year 2020, and we were waiting for this death rate to come out because we knew the amount of people being admitted to the hospital for overdoses was something that hospitals have not seen in the state of Arizona and around the country. And the data just came out this last week that the amount of overdose deaths skyrocketed 160% during this pandemic in 2020 compared to 2019.
I can imagine. No doubt.
Right?
Yeah.
And the holidays is a time depressing for a lot of people out there. And so it's important that people see this story and hear this story, regardless that it was bipolar disorder that led to your child's death, right? That, Roy, one of the big things about this podcast and getting it out so that people can learn and listen is to remove that stigma so that we can openly talk to other parents who may have a child that suffers bipolar disorder. But if we don't remove that stigma, just like if we don't remove it from addiction and alcoholism, people will continue to see a diagnosis of bipolar disorder as a scarlet letter.
Yep.
And nobody wants to wear a scarlet letter. And sometimes what people don't realize is that when somebody commits suicide, they don't think that there's other options for them.
Right.
We can't look at that as somebody as weak, somebody with a failed suicide attempt. No, in that moment, it's just like somebody who relapses. They don't choose to throw their life away. Okay? They're not choosing to say, hey, I think I'm going to go destroy my life today. They're choosing it because their brains have been hijacked. They're not thinking rationally. And they make that decision.
My daughter left us a message. We didn't know till a week later. And it was on her computer as a video. But it was very short. And I could talk about this now. I couldn't talk about this probably even years ago. And it was her crying and her just saying, I'm sorry. Something to the effect of, I'm sorry for what I'm doing. I just can't be here anymore, or something like that. In other words, it was that snapshot in time where she felt like there was no other choice but to do what she was going to do. And it was only a snippet of, like 10 seconds, 15 seconds. And I couldn't read that or look at that for years. But it does actually help me a little bit to understand that at that state of where she was, that, she saw no other avenue at that
moment.
Snapshot. And if we can help others realize that those snapshots are brief and that, life can be better and they can, and with the proper help, they can work through those issues.
Such an important message. And I'm glad that you've been able to look at that video and see that, because I cannot stress this enough to what we call normies, people who don't suffer from mental health, right? Normal people who can't understand. I'm here to tell you that when somebody is in it and they are spiraling, you are not dealing with rational. You are not dealing with that person who you typically know.
For sure.
And we need to understand that. So when people act out, when they're in that heightened state, it's not them.
Totally agree.
It's not them. And we cannot judge them by that.
Yep.
We have to come at it from such a place of empathy and compassion. Because if we could put other people in that state of mind, they will truly realize, I don't have another option. And I say this because recently during this pandemic, I came close to relapsing because of death threats to me and other threats that were being made to me. So what I tell people is, Brandon, experience right here at Sabino. I've got resources surrounding me.
Exactly.
Okay. But in that moment, I did not reach out for help. I did not call the people, all my resources.
Yeah.
Because my brain at that moment was hijacked. Brandon, this Brandon sitting here with you today, was not that Brandon in that moment that was planning that relapse.
I got it.
It was in that moment, that fight or flight moment, where I truly, Brandon, with all the experience, truly thought the only way out wasn't suicide, but was numbing myself. I need people to hear that.
Yeah.
Because people need to know that a traumatic event can happen at any point in our life. 50 years recovery, I don't care.
Yeah.
We can suffer another traumatic a traumatic incident that can set us off sideways.
It's great that you could talk about that too. And it just happened.
Because I want people, I will say this, I was in that heightened state for about 2 days. Thankfully, I had a scheduled trauma therapy appointment.
Oh, wow.
And that snapped me out of it. And then I increased that trauma therapy intensely for the weeks after, because I knew that had I not worked through those threats, had I not worked through that, what that did to me, it would surface again. Secrets lead to relapse. Shame leads to relapse, right? Because I did in those 2 days have a lot of shame, being like, Brandon, look at all the work you're doing in the recovery world. Like, what are you doing? Like calling a former drug dealer to try and get you drugs, like you start to deal. I dealt with the shame of that, right?
Yeah.
And just knowing and living through that experience, I know there's other people that do, right? I know there's other parents out there who perhaps have lost a child but never really worked through that trauma. And what I love about your story, Roy, is that you have found purpose in your life. That is what has saved you. And that is such an incredible message to tell all of the parents out there who have lost their child to overdose. Because there's a lot of parents who are doing that right now. You lost a mom or a dad to an overdose during this pandemic. Find your purpose through trauma. Find your purpose through a horrific event. That we can take something truly dark
and turn it around. Because honestly, the life I have today, I can say in my situation, I wouldn't rewrite history. I'm not talking about a loss of a child.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not talking about that. But I think what you have found is that sense of purpose, Roy, that is preventing you from turning to a bottle or turning to a drug to numb in those tough times.
So it's funny you mentioned that. So my wife has found the Britt Rose Foundation and also her clothing store that mothers and daughters can go together on and learn about, Brittany's story and maybe even talk about it if it's appropriate. My son is leading a psychiatry practices now as a chief operating officer at 29 years old. And obviously I'm here today with you as a board advisor to Sabino Recovery, helping, with leadership, the servant leadership model, with culture, with picking the right team, supporting Thomas and picking the right team members at the leadership level and throughout the organization, and really supporting execution. Because my true role is just advice and counsel on helping Thomas and the team. And that's what I do best. I'm not good at, I'm not clinical. I'm not good at anything else. I'm not in recovery, but my sweet spot is this leadership piece that I'm bringing to bear in what I do with my son and what I'm doing with Thomas. And it's been a blessing. And we're having such a great time together and building out Sabino to be the best addiction, trauma, boutique program in the country.
Why are you doing this?
That's a great question. I would say that it probably goes back to being a servant leader. I find, and I think most leaders find, that helping others brings them satisfaction and joy. When I come out here once every month or two and spend 3 to 4 days, like this week I'm out here for 4 days with Thomas to go through things that we're working on and projects. It's a joy to provide leadership and support to somebody like Thomas that is absorbing it, taking those golden nuggets and imparting it to his team and developing the organization. So for the last year and a half we've been together doing this at Sabino, it's just been a joy, and we have such great plans more for the future for this campus and possibly other things from there.
As we wrap up this podcast, what is your advice to a mom or a dad out there who is dealing with a child that maybe is suffering from mental health, maybe not bipolar, but maybe it is depression, anxiety, alcoholism, drug addiction, maybe it is bipolar disorder? What is your message to them right now?
Find some trusted resources that they can reach out to in their community. If it's suicide related, suicide prevention. If it's in whatever locale or city they live in, that they can even talk to their internal medicine or family practice doctor about who's known as the best psychiatrist or psychologist in the area, that I can talk to them about my son or daughter to get help, or a therapist. But definitely reach out. Or if they can't do that, is there somebody who has experienced the same thing that they have prior that they can have good counsel with, that they trust? Because they're out there. There's a lot of people willing to help.
I just want to say thank you to you for sharing that story, because I think there's a lot of parents out there who feel hopeless. They feel hopeless after a tragic loss. And I've seen tragic loss destroy lives beyond the life that was lost on that day. And it doesn't have to be that way. And I think that you're an example of how finding your purpose can save your soul and give you meaning.
And I would just add that you're so right, because you've mentioned 3 or 4 times about how the pandemic has accelerated all this. Ever more now is the time for folks to reach out.
You have to.
Yeah, because of the way things are. Stay home, keep your distance with folks. All the things that we need to practice health-wise might not be the best thing mental health-wise. So we need to make sure that, we're keeping the physical health, the mental health, just as top-notch as the mental health.
Yeah. I mean, Dr. Wilson and I, who's our chief medical officer down here at Sabino Recovery, and I said, listen, you have the physical effects that this virus can have on the body, right? There's the physical virus, the cough, the cold, the flu-like symptoms. But we really need to look at the mental health side of this, that this pandemic is having on us. And you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right, is that this is now more of a time to reach out to others, to reach out to those, to let them know that they can reach out back to you, when we get struggled. Because right now we have to lean on each other. We have to lean on those trusted resources around us, because we're not just living through a pandemic. As Shara, clinical director, has said, we are surviving through this pandemic right now, operating in survival mode. But thank you for continuing to be part of this team down here at Sabino Recovery. And I'm glad that you found your purpose, and hopefully that story will help inspire other parents as well. If you are a parent who are, you're listening or watching this podcast right now, and you do feel hopeless, or perhaps you have suffered tragic loss in your own life, just know that loss doesn't have to destroy the rest of your life. It really is finding that purpose in your life. Finding a purpose in my life has saved me. It truly has saved my soul and given me a purpose to stick around. It's given me that purpose to not relapse when life gets tough, because life will still get tough. It's how we react to it. So if you want more information about Sabino Recovery, we're going to provide that for you right now.
This episode of Escaping Rock Bottom is sponsored by Sabino Recovery. As an ambassador of Sabino Recovery, I have seen firsthand how they transform lives in a compassionate and loving environment. Sabino Recovery is a residential treatment program that addresses trauma, substance use, mental health, and maladaptive coping mechanisms. They offer one-on-one counseling, EMDR therapy, equine therapy, yoga, and so much more. If you would like to learn more about Sabino Recovery, please visit sabinorecovery.com or contact the number provided in the description of this podcast.